Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Operations Policy and Planning Committee meeting for September 2024. Hopefully, everyone had a good summer break as we launch back into this academic calendar. My name is Derek Gagnon. I am a school trustee, and I will be chairing this meeting this evening. We are meeting today on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, known today as the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations, on whose land we live, work, and educate. I encourage everybody, especially coming up in 2 weeks on Truth and Reconciliation Day on September 30th, to really take time to invest in your own knowledge and practices. The South Island Powwow will be a great opportunity to really see what a vibrant culture that we have here on the South Island in terms of our Indigenous people. So I encourage you all to take part. And with that, we will start the meeting by looking for an approval of the agenda. Can I get a mover? Trustee Kwan, seconded by Trustee Duncan. Any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, all those of the agenda as presented. All those in favor of the agenda as presented. Thank you, that's unanimous. Wow, we're off to a raring September start. Good thing I'm well rested after the summer. With that, we'll move into approval of the minutes for the June 10th, 2024 meeting. Looking for a mover for that. Trustee Kwan again. I guess I don't need a second for that. No, yes, no, don't need a second. Any edits to the minutes from June 10th? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that too is unanimous. Any business arising from the minutes? Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just one piece of business arising. Just wanted to check in to see if we have a date yet for the very first meeting of the Climate Action Plan Implementation Ad Hoc Committee, which we approved the terms of reference for under C1 of our June ops meeting.
Superintendent Whitten, or sorry.
No, it's me through you, Chair, to answer the question. It's generally in October. I haven't chosen a date yet, but we'll certainly get to that and let the entire board know when that is.
Thank you so much. Scrolling back up. No presentations to the committee this evening, so we move into the superintendent's report for September, including the draft enhancing student learning report, also known as ESLER for 2024-25. Superintendent Whitten.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, there is a memo in the package for reference, but I'm going to just spend a little bit of time talking about student achievement. And feedback with regards to this draft ESLER or FESL document can be sent back to me as well. I invite feedback to come. It will come back to the board on September 23rd before it needs to be sent to the Ministry of Education and Childcare on the 30th of September. So just to go over a few important parts, the FESL document is really a snapshot in time of how we are doing. It also aligns with our strategic plan and provides a review of some of the initiatives completed over the years, as well as an analysis in the trends we are seeing in the district, utilizing both provincial and school data. And lastly, it highlights a plan to address some of the areas that we have identified that require further focus. Over the past year, we've implemented some strategies that have helped improve the learning outcomes for students, and the framework for enhancing student learning highlights some of these initiatives and some successes. The initiatives will continue to evolve as we look at continuously improving. Just to mention a few of the highlights, we completed a 3-year accessibility plan We focus support on early years by increasing childcare spaces, increasing family visits to Strong Starts, and also really intentionalized our focus with transitions into kindergarten. We also increase support for newcomer students. We have a multicultural liaison support worker. We strengthened and continue to strengthen relationships with the 4 houses and working closely with Indigenous Education Department. We created opportunities for Indigenous students to explore career pathways. We had targeted literacy supports in identified elementary schools with a specific focus on supporting Indigenous students. We established children and youth in care standards of practice, which also includes reporting that comes to us 3 times per year. And we have student support plans in place for children and youth in care. We offered more nonviolent crisis intervention training throughout the year. That included whole school training as well as individual staff training. And we provided 14 mental health grants last year to schools to focus primarily on student voice and what they saw needing in their school. And then what we did throughout the spring and into the early summer is we reviewed our data and we identified areas that we needed to further focus our time in order to close the gaps. And we do recognize that we have work to do and we do have gaps. With the intellectual development area, this data showed us that there is an inequity of learning around literacy outcomes. And we have work to do as we continue to address this inequity. So working with 4 houses, with Indigenous Education Department, as well as our early years or early literacy teachers, and our literacy plan. We also look to co-develop with the Esquimalt and Songhees Nations, the literacy and numeracy programming to better meet the needs of all learners, specifically Indigenous students. We know that we want to continue to increase completion rates. The data shows us that we need to focus more specifically on students with specific disabilities or diverse abilities, more specifically students who have a ministry designation of serious mental health or behavior. And also just important to recognize that we did have improvement in reading and writing across the district. This increased the percentage of students in the proficient reading and writing, but we also know that we have to focus our energy on literacy and numeracy supports for Indigenous students. Our human and social development data depicts a need to use a distinction-based approach to be better able to focus our programming and support specifically to key transition points. And again, also to further collaboration with Indigenous education in the 4 houses. Expanding and enhancing our student-led initiatives for mental health and well-being is a focus for this year. We will continue to reframe our inclusive learning spaces and be ready for all students. So reframing our students ready for kindergarten to are we ready for all students? And then when we look at our career development data, Indigenous students and children and youth in care students are below the provincial average identified, and we have new areas of growth, which include specific supports and opportunities for children and youth in care. And also an existing area of growth is working on communication with families in collaboration with the Pathways and Partnerships team and Indigenous Ed, and the creation of culturally responsive and inclusive experiential learning opportunities. We see in our data that 60% of grade 12 students reported that they are satisfied that school is preparing them for a job in the future, and we want to increase that number. So when we have 60% saying that they're prepared, we have 40% that are saying potentially they're not. So we need to change that data. And one way is through providing increased opportunities. So we have been speaking, and Careers and Pathways and Partnerships is looking at what opportunities exist and how do we have more individuals participating. Lastly, as we continue to review data, we need to reflect on what is working, what we may need to adjust. And we've also have included in the FESL some areas that we want to adjust and continue to expand. So professional development to support Indigenous student achievement, we've seen that in all of our data that there are gaps that exist. We want to ensure that students, Indigenous students, see themselves reflected in their learning, which helps to increase a sense of belonging, often assisting in student attendance and also student achievement in literacy and numeracy, and it benefits overall mental health and well-being. We intend to have a specific focus on school goals, so we're connecting school goals or school plans with the strategic plan. And then throughout our meetings monthly with principals and vice principals, we look at alignment so that we're utilizing our time with the principals and vice principals to examine the data, to share strategies, to review the challenges, and to make plans, and to celebrate promising practices as we continuously improve. The areas of focus that you will see this year will be brought to Ed Policy so that we can spend time understanding and examining the data. So while I appreciate that this evening doesn't give us a lot of time to look deeply at our data, we do intend to bring those on a monthly basis. We'll start in October with literacy, where we will look at both district data and school level data and provincial data. And we look to strategies that we can do this year. We're looking at strategies that we need to adjust or amend, and then also ones that we need to continue. So the festival is there. I welcome feedback as we look to conclude it before we submit it, and more than welcome to send me emails or thoughts or questions just to ensure that we've captured it. It does have a limitation to the pages, so we can have 10 pages. So it's not representing all of the work that we do in the district, but it certainly does give a snapshot of where we're at as it relates to both provincial and school district data. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Superintendent. I'll open the floor to our partners to see if there's any questions before I turn it over to my fellow trustees. Nissa with VCPAC.
Thank you. Through the chair, the VCPAC looks forward to further discussion about this report. We recognize that it has a lot of data associated with it, but there's a lot of interest from parents in understanding more how the district is collecting the data and how they're applying that information to shape how we move forward.
Thank you. Any other questions from the partners? Cindy says no. My fellow trustees, questions for the superintendent. Trustee Painter.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a bit of a laundry list, so feel free to stop me at any time to make space for my colleagues. The first one that came up was Child and Youth in Care standard of practice and 3 reports annually, and I wasn't able to actually locate these. So I would appreciate getting a copy of the standard of practice and perhaps recognizing the sensitivity. Perhaps these are in-camera discussions, but I think having those reports circulated will be useful for trustees to understand that one. And Chair, if you require a motion to that effect, let me know. The next one up, I was wondering about nonviolent crisis intervention, and I was hoping that we'd have a CUPE member here as well. But one question I'd be interested in posing to our partners. It mentions increased confidence and fewer incidents. And I had a question about generally, are we tracking incidents? So to be able to make a statement like that, one would assume that we've got records to reflect this. Are we actually capturing frequency and nature of?
Superintendent Whitten.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, we track student to staff incidents. So yes, those are tracked. They come through WorkSafe. With regards to nonviolent crisis intervention, I think it's changed significantly over the past 3 years, and we really look at reframing behavior. So I think we do have plans to bring that forward to one of our ed policies, just to speak more fully on what that looks like as far as the training, but yes, I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah.
Well, I guess my question on that one through the chair is, it was around tracking and actually understanding the incidents. And I understand that incidents could be apples and oranges, in terms of the disruption to learning, level of energy involved, et cetera. But to have some understanding about that, and then also to be able to look at that and evaluate that with respect to the sort of distribution of educational assistance or frequency within specific classrooms, just to really have, as much as possible, an understanding of what's going on and whether there are solutions available, maybe perhaps, changes in our practice, et cetera. I'll stop there, Chair. It looks like others are seeking opportunities.
Superintendent, I don't know if you wanted to weigh in quickly.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chair. Trustee Painter, I think those are all very good points. And I think when we look at the information and the data that's brought forward, whether it is in a report through WorkSafe or like in an incident or in a form that we receive with inclusive education, we're looking at antecedents, what happened prior to that, what plans did we do? Is there a pattern? I think all of those are important pieces to bring forward, and I think we can share the learning that we've had and then what we're doing to address it, because when we look at the frequency or an intensity of it, we want to drill it down into that school level piece and that school conversation to adjust what we're doing. So I think those are all pieces that inclusive education along with school-based teams are looking at. And I think it is important to keep bringing it forward. Not for a minute am I suggesting that we've landed it yet, but I think it is that continuous improvement of what do we know and where are we going and how do we adjust that as we go.
Thank you. Trustee Kwan, thank you for your patience.
Yeah, and I do have some questions of my own, but this is actually a follow-up to Trustee Painter's question as well on that same kind of overarching goal that we had said there, and in there is not just the fewer incidents, but it talks about the training which has resulted in boosted staff confidence and skills, and then also increased stories of success. And so, even though that's qualitative data or qualitative results, it's something that I think, we can really celebrate. And it would, as a trustee, I'd love to hear, some of those stories and about how that's happened and how those skills have been boosted and some of the confidence that's been gained. So, just looking at those, it's important to look at the qualitative, part of that as well, and see how we can, kind of celebrate that success too, and how we can, again, even continuously improve on those. So, yeah, I'll keep my hand up for others, but I'll let Trustee Painter keep going. He's on a roll.
I defer to you, Chair. How do you want to run this?
Trustee Painter, you can have another turn.
Thank you. Through the chair, there was a question, or there was mention made of career education and increased opportunities. I think this was focused on Indigenous students. I'm mindful that for the past several years, Pathways and Partnerships has experienced budget cuts. And I was wondering how we're rationalizing increasing opportunities with a unit that it has fewer resources than they did in past years.
Superintendent.
Yeah, through the chair. So I should have begun by saying that this vessel document was co-developed and collaborated. So the feedback that has come around career development has come from Pathways and Partnerships. So I do want to recognize their voice in this document. I think when speaking with Lindsay, we're talking about other opportunities. So I think looking at amending or adjusting what we've done and adding to it. So I think she feels comfortable and confident that there are other opportunities that can be offered. I think this year there was an opportunity for Indigenous students to participate with some Camosun and some other community-related events. So I think it's continuing to look at what opportunities we have and what ones we could build out. Again, looking at both the Esquimalt nations and Songhees nations about interests that they may have and their students may have. So I do want to recognize that these are also her words that are put into this document.
I really appreciate that. Thank you, Chair. One more, and then I'm happy to take a break. And that was page 10 of the report, 17 of the agenda package. There was mention of Equity Scan. I think this was with respect to some of the initiatives related to Indigenous students. And I was just wondering if we had a status report on that one. I was trying to track where we were on getting that developed.
Superintendent.
And through the chair, I would have to bring that back. We did start it again last year, but it didn't move forward all the way. So I would need to find out from both the Indigenous Education Department as well as the ministry as where we're at.
Thanks.
Thanks. Trustee Kwan.
Okay. I noticed a few little things that could probably just be fixed, you know, kind of for presentation wise, and so I can just send those offline to you as well. But the first question I had really was around under the heading of existing and or emerging areas for growth, and then we have some bullet points there, and you know the first sentences are kind of bolded. So you know, we see in some of those areas where, you know, we talk about enhancing student-led mental health initiatives and what, you know, the district plans to do, and then under the improved participation in dual credit and what we aim to do. But then we go up kind of increase completion rates and increase literacy rates, and we hear more like we can do this or we could do this. And so to me, the language just kind of speaks to, not sure if we're going to do this or not. So I just wondered if we could talk a little, if we could really, you know, solidify what our plans are, and this is really what we're going to do this year. That might be a little bit more helpful, I think, to be clear on what our plans are. And then the last one there, reframing kindergarten, no, sorry, the second last one, enhance assessment practices. I just wondered, to me, it's unclear what the action item there is. And so I just wondered if there was, you know, some kind of language in there that we could, or perhaps maybe you can enlighten today kind of what the action is for this year and what we plan to do as far as our growth goes in that aspect specifically. So I'll leave it there for now, and maybe the superintendent would like to respond.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Through the chair. Some of it, I think, is coming back and looking at the change of language between what we intend or could do to what we will do. With regards to the assessment practices, I think we're looking at continuing to explore cultural safety and cultural sensitivity. So when we are assessing, when we are selecting resources, are we being respectful to not only to Indigenous perspectives, but also Esquimalt and Songhees, like the nations. So I think when we are assessing, when we are looking at assessment tools, are we ensuring that they are culturally sensitive and that we're looking at it through an unbiased perspective? I think there's also a culture of low expectations, and so we need to always be mindful of that and expect high expectations for all students.
Trustee Kwan.
Yeah, sorry, and just to follow up, and I 100% agree. And I think when I read that, it talks about what the feedback is, but not necessarily what our plan is or what we plan to do. So I'm glad to hear that that's kind of where our plan goes and what our actions are. So you know, perhaps maybe just feeding that in there a little bit more and really, you know, stating kind of where we want to go and how we want to do that. That's great. Thank you.
I'm going to go with Trustee Duncan and then Trustee Painter. Trustee Duncan.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a few comments, just, I appreciate that as the ESLR, otherwise or previously known as FESL, has evolved, so have the ministry requirements around the type of template that's used, the number of pages, and so on and so forth. We did benefit from some ministry feedback last year around governance, oversight, and reporting mechanisms built into the ESLR, and some observations that they shared and some recommendations around being more clear about what that, what our governance, oversight, and ongoing reporting mechanisms are in respect to our commitments in the ESLR. So that would be my one observation, is just sort of looking to kind of where we build that in. Superintendent, you mentioned that we would be looking to Ed Policy on a monthly basis to provide some reporting against this. There might also be some other opportunities through ongoing reporting, board level reporting. I really am hoping that this is the impetus that we need as a board as well, to reflect in partnership with our senior leadership team on the nature of reporting that comes before us, the nature of the planning that takes place, the operational planning. There's a great graphic that you've included, which really speaks to some of the structures and frameworks in place, everything from school plans, school goals, all the way up to operational plans, board budgets, and so on. So although I think we could be more clear in the current draft about the reporting mechanisms and governance and oversight that will be brought to bear on an ongoing basis, I also think that we really want to be as clear as we can about what our plans are. And then once we're clear on what our plans are, we can then look to other processes that should complement this one, like our board budget process, just to make sure that we, align our resources. If some of the assumptions we made when we set our budget for this school year prove to need some further reflection or refinement in light of the current profile of our students, then again, building in some opportunities to revisit our resource alignment would be really welcome. And then finally, just a comment around planning. So, and in two areas where we focus currently in the ESLR, one around literacy and then one around inclusive learning. So in terms of literacy, we've had a literacy plan in place for a number of years, and I believe that we are either in the last year. I think we're in the last year, and I'll look to the superintendent just to remind me of where we are in terms of that plan. But if we're nearing the end or in the last year of the plan, it would be great to see us this year really reflecting on where we're going moving forward, what has and hasn't worked, and really leaning into the data and leaning into the student feedback about what is working and what is not, and then revising those plans. And then likewise with inclusive learning, like for many, many years now, we have been living a change in direction around how we do inclusive learning in our school district. I think it's a really great opportunity for us to, again, reflect on how those changes have gone and where there's opportunities for us to further refine our practice, or perhaps revisit the programs and services that are available to students. So I know that's kind of very high level, but I just really wanted to give some comments and my own thoughts about how we move forward. So thank you.
Superintendent Whitten.
Thank you. Yes, fantastic comments. I think we could and should include a planning sort of governance alignment document in the appendix. So we could put that in there. While the 10 pages are probably not the place that it will fit in, it certainly should be in an appendix of how all of these plans align. So I think that would be very important to add in. And I also think that our Ed Policy presentations should really go into that depth of each of those focus areas of coming from, they're all at different places based on the years that they've been in place. So I think we're in year 4 of the literacy plan, which means we are nearing the end of that plan. In October, you will hear from the district principal around where that plan has taken us to and what we need to do to focus on that improvement. So I would think and expect that every ed policy will have that. We have literacy coming, we have numeracy coming. There's a schedule that was included in the ed policy pack-up, and each of those presentations will bring forward the data and should bring forward what we're currently doing, and where we think we're headed, and if we're not headed in the right direction, what we'll do to change that piece.
Thank you, Superintendent, and apologies, Chair. I'm just going to turn my video off. I'm having a little bandwidth issue going on here.
No worries. We'll go back to Trustee Painter.
Thank you, Chair. And the template limitations I'm trying to be mindful of. I recognize that in some cases that doesn't provide for opportunities for fulsome discussions, if we will. But I noticed on page 9 of the report, page 16 of the package, under engagement, it mentions a district operating in a deficit. And I would seek some clarity on that. For me, deficit has always meant that you're spending more money than you have. And the consequence is you go into debt. I know in my day job, we talk a lot about risk managing, where we're anticipating that certain projects won't fully spend and that we can allocate those resources to balance things out elsewhere. But that's an internal decision working within the budget. What concerns me here is that any expression of deficit immediately signals to me, and perhaps anyone who's not fully versed on structural deficits, et cetera, that we are overspending what our budget allocations are. And I would appreciate some clarification on that.
Superintendent Whitten?
We'll pass it over to Secretary Treasurer Stride for that.
Secretary Treasurer Stride, that also very much makes sense.
I'm sorry, I may not have caught everything that you said, Trustee Painter, but in just reading that sentence, I think really the focus is around because we didn't have additional funds. We do have a structural deficit, which does mean that we don't have enough revenue to cover off all of our expenses. And we've been working on that. So with a lack of additional or extra funds to put towards these types of activities, we have to use existing funds and we have to reallocate them from one place to another. So I think the intention was to focus on not so much that we're in a deficit, but the fact that in order to prioritize these things, we needed to shuffle the funds around and use our existing funds and existing resources to put towards this.
Yeah, I think in that case, I'd prefer to deal with some language around risk management as opposed to deficit. I'll defer to you and Julie and anyone else who actually works in a financial area. But deficit has a distinct connotation that becomes very political very quickly for me. But I'm happy to drop that one and defer to you. One just general observation is in section A, I found that the diagrams were really difficult to interpret. And I was wondering if it would be possible to put the value for the current year by group just next to where the label is, and the label bars where it talks to entire population or Indigenous learners, et cetera, and then just a bracket to show what that percentage number is for the current year. I believe that might help to clarify things. The other one I was wondering about is just the base, the axis. Does this include 23, 24 years? Because the labeling indicates the last one is 22, 23, and it's hard to tell if the line goes beyond that or not. And I don't know if that's something that can be adjusted, but just in terms of clarity of communication, those were very minor. And
Super.
I'll take a break now, Chair. Thanks.
Sorry. Superintendent Whitten.
Thank you. Yes, very good points, Trustee Painter. This is the first year that the data has been pre-populated. So this is ministry data set. I'm not blaming anyone. This is how it has come to us, and we try to add our own values in there to make it easier to read. It's a incredible job that would have taken many, many months and hours to do, and so we're sitting with what we have. The ministry has acknowledged that there will be continuous improvement and that we may see different data sets in the future, but this is sort of what we were provided with and what will be submitted in there. I don't know that we can overlay our own pieces into it, but at Ed Policy, I think you will see and hear data that is probably a little bit more relevant to hear and a little bit easier to read.
Yeah, and I was just going to offer that, and perhaps there's an opportunity to provide a link or something like that, but a lot of this data is reported on the ministry website, and that might be a redirect that can fit in a footnote as opposed to, you know, recreating all of these things. Thanks.
With Trustee Painter's talk about the hyperlink, I would just question whether or not this is a document that needs to stand alone in a hard copy as well. And if that's the case, then a hyperlink wouldn't necessarily be the most beneficial thing. But if it's a document we're expecting to live primarily online, then yes. Trustee Kwan.
Yeah, and this is actually a follow-up to Trustee Painter's too. I do have, again, some more of my own questions, but with regards to the data set, it puts a whole new light, pardon me, on the fact that it's ministry populated data. I just thought it might be helpful to have participation rates for some of the FSA data, because I feel like the participation rates especially skew it. And so, you know, whether we can even put that in this data and overlay our own, but I really do think it's worth showing that, because I think, you know, you can't take the grass without having that additional knowledge that not every child participates in those FSA. Yeah, so I'm happy to keep, pardon me, my voice is going. I don't know what's going on here, but I'm happy to keep going with some questions if Trustee Painter is okay with that, or.
I defer to the chair. I'll stick my hand up again in a little bit. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm okay with it. So, you know, you can keep going, Trustee Kwan.
All right. So the first thing here, and actually this is on, I will say, this is on behalf of Trustee McNally, who wasn't able to be at the meeting tonight, but did have some questions. And it was really around some of the pieces with literacy and having our Indigenous council, as well as our houses, and how that collaboration would work. I think the first question was really, we mentioned our Indigenous Education Council, and you know, I know that was in the process of being formed and how that was going to look, and just wondered if there's been any progress made on that, and whether something has been formed, and yeah, how we'll progress with that.
Thank you.
Superintendent Whitten, sorry.
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, we are progressing, and I believe Indigenous Education Council has plans to meet in October. So I'm not sure the date has been set, but it is planning to meet in October.
Trustee Kwan, you have further questions?
I do. Thank you. Thank you for that information. And I believe Trustee McNally would love to have a little bit more information. I'm sure the board will be. Will probably it'll come to us as to more information on who forms that and what their process will be, that kind of thing as well. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. The other thing that Trustee McNally was curious about was especially around literacy and the education coordinators, I think from 2 of the 4 houses that we work with, specifically Songhees and Esquimalt nations. And she just wondered, I think last year we had the board had an opportunity to come together with the education coordinators and their teams and talk a little bit about some of the progress and the work that was being done. And I think she had a question as to whether that will continue to happen, kind of when we can expect that to happen, when the regular reports kind of will come. So just wondered if you had any information on that.
Superintendent Whitten.
I think in the conversations with both the Esquimalt and Songhees nations and with their education coordinator, it is a conversation around the HOD report. So when that comes in, typically December, January, it's planned in the annual work plan, I think, to come to a board in February or March. And there's conversations with the Esquimalt Nation and Songhees nations if they would like to come along and sort of co-presenting and co-speak to it. If it doesn't happen there, I think certainly in other formats you will see it. We do have LEA meetings that are regularly occurring, and those are ones where schools are coming and they're speaking about data. Education councils from Esquimalt and Songhees also attend, or education coordinators attend, and so there is a conversation that looks more specifically about schools and about student-to-student achievement. So I think both avenues can be available, and certainly with education coordinators from Esquimalt and Songhees.
Thank you.
One more?
One more, sure, let's do it.
And this is again from Trustee McNally, so I'll just continue and finish up the question. So I think on page, 28 of the pack-up, it underneath the analysis and interpretation of outcome 3, students feel welcome, safe, and connected. Approach to teaching and learning, there is a reference to the Guam Speakums program, and I just wondered if we could have a little more information on what that group is, what their mandate is, how that, whether trustees or the board will receive kind of any information on the collaboration that's happening.
Superintendent Whitten.
Just first looking for it, but also probably better to have Indigenous education come back. This is a program that's offered at Songhees, I believe. And so I would not want to speak for them on what that programming looks like. So we can definitely arrange to find out more information or share with the board.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Painter.
Thanks. I came across one comment that I have to admit I'm struggling to get my head around. It's on page 20, and the phrase was, "It's evident by literacy outcomes for Indigenous learners, the district is reflective of its own historic practices and colonial approach to education." And I have to admit that while I'm not disputing it, that is such a broad statement that personally feels like a bit of a condemnation of our staff, honestly, as well as the structure of the institution. And I really have challenges with a statement of fact being offered in such a manner without an expectation that we are going to get some sort of a breakdown about what are these problems that we're dealing with, and start to develop a action plan on how to respond to it. Well, I honestly thought we had, like in discussions with teachers working with Indigenous students at some of our priority schools, and the work that they are putting in there, what I understand about efforts being made to collaborate directly with educational leads with at least two of the nations, or two of the houses, the nations. I really feel that we're going to a lot of effort to recognize historic practices and the historic colonial approach and trying to address this. So having a statement that just sits there like that in the report is really challenging for me, and I'd appreciate some clarification on that.
Superintendent Whitten.
Yeah, thank you. I think, first of all, I appreciate the comment and want to make sure that what is reflected in there is understood. I think one of the things with regards to this report, it should be easily read by everyone. So if this doesn't make sense or it is high level and doesn't speak to the specifics, we would want to address that. With regards to your question, Trustee Painter, I think what we're talking about as we continue to learn more about what it means to be in good relation with nations, to remove our own bias and also look at the culture of low expectations. I think we are looking at what it means to be not practicing colonial approaches in both our assessment, in our choice of resources, and in how we work alongside Esquimalt and Songhees nations. But again, if I'm interpreting it as it's written there, that's what I would say, but I would want to make sure that this is reflecting both Indigenous education as well as others in this document. So I think it's an excellent point, and if you may, I will go and find out more information to make sure I'm speaking specifically and also add that in there so people understand what we're talking about and where we're headed.
Yeah, and Chair, I just want to be clear. I'm not seeking to dispute the statement. It's just that it covers a lot of ground in a very brief period, and I am concerned about how it may be perceived without broader context to support it or to ground it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to add one point of my own as I see that the trustees' hands are down. From a accessibility standpoint for the document itself, there are two different fonts in particular that fail web content accessibility guidelines. That light green font that is even featured as the title font doesn't match it. And the kind of peach font later in the document is also too light from a contrast perspective. So as somebody who does struggle with contrast of shades, I would appreciate, and I'm sure there are others that would also appreciate, just a darker contrast font for accessibility purposes. So that's my little contribution. And if there are no other points to be had about, oh, Trustee Duncan is weighing in. Trustee Duncan.
Sorry, I'm just a very brief comment on, again, I believe it's page 20 of the packet. At the very end of the page in the section called Approach to Equity of Learning. I just wanted to kind of touch base on this particular, the paragraph at the end of that page. We talk about the need to fund specialists, including psychologists, speech and language pathologists, literacy education, learning for teachers and so on. So I just wanted to kind of touch base because this, I think, is just a really good example of where there are opportunities for us to reflect on how much we're investing in that kind of support, who needs it, right? And whether it's meeting the needs of students in all of our schools, and then looking more specifically at the resourcing, because those kinds of specialist supports I know are so critical to supporting all students, but in particular priority students. So that might be something that, when we're looking at presentations and reflections and reporting out at Ed Policy, we maybe look at that as just one area, like as an example, and be more specific about how much we're funding, who the supports are going to, where are the gaps, and what are the strategies and plans for addressing those gaps. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Through the chair,
Superintendent?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the comments. I would want to clarify that I think the expanding is not necessarily increasing numbers of roles or people in those roles. I think it's about connecting and aligning our work. And maybe stretching it into middle and high school. I think the literacy plan does speak to sort of, level 1, level 2, and level 3 support. So for all, for some, and for few. I know that one of the things that we did recognize was that we did at times work in isolation with psychologists and speech and language pathologists. And I think as soon as last Friday is meeting collectively and saying, how do we all come together and address these, whether they're going in as a team or whether they're working independently with students, is understanding where we're headed and how we all can collectively get there. So I think it's a bit of aligning our efforts to make sure that we're kind of understanding where we want to go and what we'll be looking at to move that forward. But I do appreciate and understand what the comment, Trustee Duncan.
Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no other comments or questions, Superintendent, if you have anything else that you feel like reporting in your report?
I do not, but thank you very much for the offer.
Thank you. We will then move along. We do not have any personnel items to report on this evening, which takes us into finance and legal affairs. So I'll turn it over to the Secretary Treasurer for the Willows Elementary Childcare update.
Thank you, Chair. So we just wanted to provide an update on Willows Childcare since the last meeting where it was discussed in June. Since then, we can share that the district has awarded a service provider through an RFP process to open on-site childcare for the school community. So during the summer, they adapted and licensed 2 unused classrooms in the school and also the school gym to use for before and after school care, that they are now in operation. In doing this, they coordinated their services with the District of Oak Bay. So they're operating out of the NLC at the Oak Bay High School and provide services to Willows families. What they decided was that K-1 would be serviced at Willows, and then grades 2 to 5 at Oak Bay High School at the NLC. Even doing this, both of the service providers continue to have wait lists. I'll also just mention that there was a community engagement evening that was held at Willows on June 5th. That's regarding new childcare spaces that are funded by the ministry for Willows. There was an information package that was shared by email with families and also hand delivered to neighboring residences. The event was attended by community members, families, and staff. And then we continue to gather additional information through the district community engagement email through the month of June. So they have received all of the information, and there are 3 key things that are coming forward in the feedback that's been provided. The main one is that there is an urgent need for before and after school care in the Willows community. There is a desire to preserve the green space on the school site. And there is some concern that's been raised around potential disruption of school operations during the construction of the childcare facilities. So at the moment, we're looking at next steps and just taking all of that information that's been gathered through that consultation process, working with the facility services and the acting district principal early learning and childcare They're gonna continue to work with the architect to look at, the best design for childcare spaces at Willows. And so we don't have any further information on that at this time. Happy to try and answer any questions that you might have.
Trustee Duncan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Secretary Treasurer and facilities staff, and also Charmaine, who I'm sure fed in as well, and to all the work that's going on around us. I just wanted to get some clarity around next steps as it relates to signing off, the plan. So it's great to hear the nature of the consultation and some of the main key points of feedback we're receiving. I'm keen to kind of know process-wise what's planned in terms of board approval. Normally, if we're going to kind of add a space or do some permanent changes to one of our facilities, the board would have some oversight over that. So I'm just wondering what the plan is in terms of bringing forward recommendations of possible designs, so that the board can have some input into the final choice.
Through the chair, I think Marnie is on the call here too, but I don't think we're quite there yet. I think historically around childcare, as you know, the design of the space and the addition of the space has not historically come through the board. And so I think if the board is looking to have input as to the design of the childcare space at Willows, we can take that direction and ensure that that information does come back to the board. Whether you want that in an in-camera or public meeting, receive that feedback.
Trustee Duncan, is that a follow-up?
It is. Thank you, Chair, if I may.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, and it just to clarify, like I really just want to acknowledge that from like a capital planning perspective, the ministry has taken a different approach to childcare, which is really, from what I understand, excluded boards in a way that it wouldn't normally have done so. Certainly not in terms of other capital planning. And not included childcare as sort of part of our like regular capital planning process, which of course does require board approval. So I accept that we are where we are, and we've got many approved applications for facilities on board-owned land. In this case, I know we're looking at a potential addition to one of our schools. So I also understand that the ministry is realizing that perhaps the capital planning process as it relates to childcare needs some refinement, because perhaps excluding boards was perhaps a little bit short-sighted. So I'm just hoping that in this case, there is an opportunity for the board to have that kind of usual oversight over what we approve happens to one of our buildings. And so I'm just suggesting that regardless of whether the ministry has completely changed the way that it's approaching childcare capital planning, I certainly would like to see it come before the board. And how that, I mean, we would normally, I think, do that in a public meeting, but we can always talk about this further at agenda planning.
Thank you, Trustee Duncan. I'll turn it over to Nissa with VCPAC before Trustee Kwan.
Thank you. And through the chair, I'd just like to express, I believe last spring when this discussion came up, especially seeing as the childcare positions are being considered on a school property, the ongoing maintenance and upkeep of the property, which I believe was not included in the capital expenditure approval, is of particular concern, simply because early childhood, like before and after school care, is not generally included in school operations, and maintaining the space for these, as much as I support it and I see the need in the community, and certainly families want these positions at a school, especially the size of Willows, which I think is one of the largest elementary schools in the province. It's a considerable undertaking for a district to have to plan for the maintenance of that space going forward without having input in the planning and the building process. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Kwan.
Thank you. I just want to say, first of all, I appreciate Nissa's comment. I would 100% agree. And yeah, definitely something to keep advocating about. My questions, I had two questions really, and maybe I can get them into one so we can keep moving along. But the first one was about the current childcare provider at Willows Elementary. I see that they're renting the space on a 10-month license of occupation. And I just wondered if that was like, so it expires after 10 months and then we renew it for the next year, or is there a kind of a continuing agreement with the childcare provider, and how long would that agreement be? And then the second question I had is whether we have any plans to do another public consultation once the design is created, to see kind of how the public feels, specifically given that there is desire to preserve the green space as well as concern about disruption of the school operation. So those were my two questions.
Secretary Treasurer.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding the first one, it is a 10-month license of occupation. So it's essentially, it's like a lease agreement, but it doesn't have any interest in land. That's where we generate our revenue to offset our costs, such as custodial costs, grounds costs, maintenance. And also a part of that goes into a capital replacement fund so that in the future we can also do more upgrades that are more capital in nature. For example, like replacing boilers or siding or roofs and things like that if they're standalone. We do it 10 months. We used to do longer, but we have basically switched everyone that we can to a 10-month agreement, but there is an understanding that assuming there are no issues, that agreement will be renewed. And so, as far as I'm aware, like people are comfortable having the 10-month agreement, knowing that they will have continued use of that space. Regarding further public consultation around design, I don't know the answer to that because we're still looking at what the possibilities are for that. So we haven't really gone beyond what we would do with that. Again, I just referring to our historical practice, and Marnie and her team haven't had to do that in the past. So if we are making a shift, we just need to be mindful, like, of planning for that as well, because these things take time.
Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, sorry, again, I will try to be brief. Just on this point around the calculation of long-term costs and the term of the agreements with providers. I just want us to be mindful that there's a couple of things. One, being that, I think we discussed previously the need to reflect again on our assumptions about the long-term costs associated with providing these spaces, in light of just the escalating costs of everything from supplies to services and so on. And then in addition to that, I think, some advocacy around what support the ministry intends to provide districts, given that we are, rightly so, having childcare on our properties, but may not be operating them. And so may not have access to sort of the traditional kind of capital funding that school districts would usually potentially be accessing. And then just finally, the terms of the contracts. I think I'm really pleased to hear that we've got 10-month terms with a little bit of flexibility built in, because I think this is a new space. And I think as a district, we need to continue to have a conversation about whether or not we decide eventually to bring these kinds of services in-house and utilize our own staff and other appropriate staff to provide childcare services ourselves. Certainly other districts on the island in the province are doing so. And so, yeah, just wanted to put that out there since there was an opportunity. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Duncan. Any further comments on the Willows Childcare update? Seeing none, I'll move us into the multi-year financial plan 2024 through 2027. Once again, turning it over to the Secretary Treasurer.
Thank you, Chair. So included in the agenda is the multi-year financial plan, 2024 to 2027. This plan has come out of the ministry's financial planning and reporting policy, which requires boards to develop, implement, and provide to the ministry multi-year financial plans to show how they will use funding and resources to support strategic objectives and operational needs with a focus on improving student educational outcomes. So just to be clear, this financial plan doesn't change and it doesn't impact our budget process. It's completely outside of that scope. There is no formal board approval that's required. Last year was the first year that we were required to do this report. And we submitted it. It went through audit committee and we submitted and the board. And we were to get some feedback on our initial report, but I don't believe we've received that yet. I don't know if that's forthcoming. So this is the second time we've created this report. It was intended to go to audit committee, but was referred to ops so that there could be further discussion with a larger group. And then it will go to the board on Monday. There is an expectation that the board will discuss what's within the document and be comfortable with the content and the direction. We did use a piece of the multi-year financial plan when we looked at the 24-25 annual budget. So prior to making, before the board made any decisions, like kind of where we were at, looking forward to for the next 3 years. So we took that plan, we updated it to include the decisions that were made by the board, and then also reviewed all of the assumptions that we made. So it's always tricky when you're looking at a forecast that far out into the future, because we might know with more certainty what's happening in the next year, but 2 years out, there's a lot of uncertainty around a lot of things, including funding and our expenses. So included in the agenda package is a list of all of the assumptions that were made in creating this financial plan. We used the enrollment figures that we submitted to the ministry in February. So those were, those numbers came through a committee that reviewed a Baragar and also local knowledge and their knowledge. And so we see in these projections an increase of 82 FTE in 25-26 and a further 41 FTE in 26-27. We are making an assumption that the operating grant and special labor settlement grants relative to bargain increases that were announced by the ministry are included in revenue for the future years. And that ministry per pupil funding has been held constant at the rates that were announced in March, because we don't know what the future per pupil amounts will be. We are expecting that they will at least increase the labor settlement costs. We're assuming that international student enrollment will decline slightly over the next 2 years, a reduction of 10 FTE in 25-26, and a further reduction of 35 FTE in 26-27. The full year tuition for international is now at 17,000, and we haven't built in any increases beyond 24-25. The expenses that are included in the plan include the bargain salary increases received for 24-25, but no predictions of increases beyond that. We made an adjustment for educational assistant salaries, a reduction of 0.5 in 25, 26, 26, 27. And that's basically based on unfilled absences and leaves that were seen in 24, 25. The instruction expense is based on the projected enrollment. So we usually estimate that at least 80% of the revenue will be expenses, either in an increased staffing, supplies. Benefit rates, we've used the 24-25 rates because that work hasn't been done and we don't know what the future benefit rates will be. We haven't included any inflationary increases for expenses. What we did do though is any one-time adjustments that were made in the budget process for 24-25 have been added back in the future years. And lastly, there's a budget of 1.5 million that's in the 24-25 annual budget. And we're projecting 1.6 million budget requirements in 25-26 and a further 1.5 million in 26-27. So let's jump back here. If we were to hold all of the revenue and expenses constant, we would be projecting a deficit of 1.9 million in 25-26 and a deficit of 2 million in 26-27. However, there was a surplus at June 30th, 2024 that could be used to offset the deficit in a 25-26. This is still something that needs to be discussed and approved by the board. The surplus available is 1.8 million, which would bring that deficit down to 0.1 million. In addition, as you know, we are required by the ministry to hold an unrestricted operating surplus or contingency. Our minimum based on policy is 4.6 million. We are currently at 617,000 in our financials. Again, coming to the board next week, there's a proposal to increase that to 1 million even. And final thoughts are that we do have a very small contingency and we have minimal sources of alternative funding in order to offset our deficit. So we still have work to do to dig deeper and improve our understanding of how our current budget meets our operational needs and how it aligns with the goals and strategies that we have in our strategic plan in the ESLR that we've talked about this evening, operational plans and school plans. So my suggestion would be that we could use this multi-year financial plan as a starting place to discuss the 25-26 annual budget and the budget in the year after. We do continue to have a structural deficit that we would need to deal with, if not next year, the year after, and just understand the impact of any decisions that we would make on future years. So there is a motion in the package to accept the report and move it forward to the board at the September 23rd meeting. Happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. Nissa with VCPAC.
Thank you. And through the chair, I want to recognize the amount of work that goes into pulling these kinds of reports together. So thank you very much. It was a very dense, lots of information, but quite clearly laid out. I have about 5 comments, but I'll start with the first one that is of paramount importance to the parent community, I think. And it's around the educational assistance in schools. Why are we seeing a reduction in the budget instead of making an effort to recruit for or fill these positions that are being vacated, given that, well, at least from our preliminary results of the survey that the VCPAC put out to parents in the school community in June, it's really surfacing that There's a lot of concern about the lack of educational assistance in the schools, and that is across the board coming up as a major topic for the parent community and the family community in this district. So I'll start there, and then if I have an opportunity to ask a few more clarifying questions, I will. Otherwise, I will cede the floor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll turn that over to the leadership team.
I'll start off with that. I think because this is a multi-year financial plan, this isn't something that we've moved forward as part of the budget process, but I suspect that it would be a conversation that we would have as we move into the budget process. So one of Julie's jobs as Associate Secretary Treasurer and her financial services team is to identify areas where we see underspending or things like this, where we have hiring lags where we're not able to do that. I know HR has been putting in increased efforts to try to address the EA shortage. Ultimately, that's what we would want, is to be able to have EAs in positions, even if it has a negative impact on our budget, where we have to increase the budget to support that, because we know that's best for our schools. So it's a good question, and I don't know if Superintendent may want to add on to that.
Thank you to the chair. If I may, yes, HR individuals in HR are actively recruiting and looking for ways to retain. That does include continuing with the EA bridge, which often does allow for us to hire more EAs. I agree with Secretary Treasurer's comments. This is not something that we're looking to save money. It is actually something that we are addressing time and energy to recruit more people to the district. So I know that HR does a lot of work around this. The budget piece that we see here isn't the preferred option. It's a reality at where we're at right now.
Thank you, Superintendent. Nessa, follow-up?
Thank you for that clarification. This is not a follow-up. Am I allowed to ask another?
You can ask another.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate your time this evening. I had a question around the decline in international student enrollment over the next 2 years. It seemed to be linked to a reduction in 10 full-time equivalent positions in the 25-26 fiscal year, and also a further reduction of 35 FTEs in the 26-27 school year. I was just wondering, sort of two related questions. What are these positions and how would that impact students' education or support? And are the positions ones that are funded by the revenue from the International Students Program directly? Yeah, that's the question.
Secretary Treasurer Stride.
Regarding this specifics positions, I would have to defer to Julie Lettner, our Associate Secretary Treasurer, but generally, when there's a decline in international enrollment, there's a decline in revenue, and also decline in teacher staffing associated with the reduction in the enrollment. Yeah, Julie, I don't know, do you have anything further that you could add regarding the positions, the teaching position?
My apologies, Nessa. What page is the teaching positions on?
It's on page 39 of the financial plan, which is page I just lost it. Page 39, I think, of the pack-up.
Yes. And fourth bullet, Julie.
Oh, those are student FTE. Oh,
Yeah, those are student FTE.
sorry.
Oh, are they? So that's student FTEs, not teaching FTEs. All right, thank you. Oh, problem solved. Yay. Okay, so then I think that answers my related question, which is around if the things that are talked about there in the FTEs are around student FTEs, then that answers all my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And my apologies to the committee. I'm still having bandwidth issues and my camera won't actually turn on now, so I apologize. So yeah, I just had a few, I guess, comments and then questions about how we move forward. First of all, thank you so much for the multi-year plan. It is really appreciated. And, I think it's unfortunate that, again, that the way that it's been rolled out, there's sort of a suggestion that the boards wouldn't be involved in the sign off and in this sort of process in a more meaningful way, rather than just sort of seeing it, because I think that it adds a significant amount of context and is really beneficial to our budget planning process every year. I certainly would love to see this align with our budget planning process, and then further, as assumptions and adjustments can be reported out. So when we do know more and we do further refine it, implementing some kind of either biannual or whatever makes sense reporting process, just to kind of keep this up front and center in the board's mind as we're doing our annual budget work and planning for the future. So that's what I want to say in terms of overall and the board involvement with this particular plan. In terms of the particulars, there were a couple of things that I wanted to discuss. First was around ISP revenue projections. I noticed we've put in enrollment projections, student FTE, but I'm wondering where we are from a revenue perspective, both this year and what we project revenue-wise from the ISP program over the next couple of years. I appreciate if you don't have those numbers tonight, but would appreciate having them moving forward. And finally, if I may, Chair, my other question was around technology purchases and device inventory tracking and so on. So, and again, this multi-year plan speaks to the level of investments that we're planning to make and have made over the last budget cycle in technology, everything from teacher laptops, educator laptops, to student devices, to network infrastructure, and so on and so forth. And the reason I flag it is because I think I hope to see that as a topic that we dive into in a bit more depth and breadth in our operational standing committee meetings moving forward. I know there's some planning in the works, and Secretary Treasurer, perhaps you want to speak to that a little bit this evening, but planning for what we need from a learning perspective and also what is possible to purchase and maintain from a financial perspective, I think is something that the board will want to be very clear on, both from a budget planning process perspective, but also from an advocacy perspective. So I just wanted to flag that from the multi-year plan. But overall, I just want to say thank you so much for this document. It's hugely helpful and I think will be very important to us moving forward.
Thank you, Trustee Duncan. Secretary Treasurer.
Thank you, Chair. Just leading off of Trustee Duncan's comments around the technology plan. The IT for Learning department is working on a 5-year plan, looking at all of their technology requirements. So not just things like student devices, which I know is something that is a priority for them right now. So if mentioning student devices, for example, because it is in the financial plan at a certain ratio, there is an intention once the schools are up to the ratio that's been established, that there is a review of how those ratios are impacting learning within the school. So that is something that's to come. The 5-year plan, I think there's still work to be done. There's some decisions that need to be made about how we'll move forward with some of the hardware that we have on premise and whether or not we might want to shift to having some things in the cloud. So conversations are happening there, but certainly once we have something that they're comfortable bringing to the board and sharing, we're more than happy to do that.
Thank you.
Chair, if I may just seek some clarity in terms of a follow-up.
You may.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to confirm that our actual international student program in terms of the revenue will be something that will be either clarified tonight or clarified at a subsequent ops meeting, both in terms of what we've generated this last year and whether that's above or below projections, as well as from a multi-year financial planning perspective, what our projections of international student program revenue is for the next 2 years. Just wanted to clarify that that will come to the next ops.
Secretary Treasurer.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm not sure that we're prepared to be able to provide that information this evening, so we can commit to bringing that back to a future ops meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I love the mute button. It's great. Further questions on the multi-year financial plan? Seeing none, I'm wondering if anybody is willing to move the recommended motion that the Board of Education of School District number 61 accept the multi-year financial plan 2024-2027. Moved by Trustee Kwan. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Trustee Duncan, if I could get a
Aye.
verbal vote. Aye. The ayes have it. That passes unanimously. We move on in our agenda to the monthly financial reports for the summer months of June, July, and August 2024, and I'll turn it over to the Secretary Treasurer once more.
Well, thank you, Chair. So we'll start off with the monthly financial report for June 2024, which is on page 63 of your agenda package. Last year at ops, we did report June 2023 numbers, and June 2024 was run after year end was completed. So the budget that you see there reflects the final budget plus any changes that were made to the budget up to year end. And the actuals are for the full fiscal year, so July 1st to June 30th. As to revenue, the percentage column is reflecting the amount of revenue that was budgeted and not received. The current year, we're at 0%. So almost the same received as budgeted, and the prior year we had received 1% more revenue than budgeted. If you look at the total expenses, the percentage column for that is the amount of expense budget unspent. The current year is at 3%, and the prior year was at 2%. I'm not sure if you'd like me to just pause and see if there's any questions regarding June before we move into the new fiscal year.
I'll take a quick look if there's any questions. Seeing none, feel free to move along.
All right. Okay, so on page 66 of your agenda package, you can see the monthly financial report for the month of July. July 2023 is what was reported at ops in the previous year, and the July 2024 was run after month end. So the budget for this one is the preliminary or annual budget and any changes that have been made to the month end. One thing you should keep in mind is that it doesn't include any carry forwards from the prior year. and the actuals are only for the month of July. So when we look at revenue, the amount of revenue budgeted not yet received, current year, we're at 92%, which is the same as the previous year. And looking at expenses, the amount of expense budget that's still available to spend current year is 97%, which is also the same as last year. One thing I'll just mention about these 2 months that we're talking about, not only are there carry forward budgets that are missing, but we have year-end entries that we make that we reverse in July. And so you might see some credits, or there are credit balances that are sitting in there that are going to skew the numbers until those early entries come through. We usually see it sort of settle by September. And so I'll just add that in, that some of the numbers might seem a little bit off. The other thing too is that when we give schools their budget, we put it into one, usually one object, like 519 for supplies, for example, and then schools will do a reallocation. Generally, that process is completed. Some do it early, but at the very latest, I think they have to do it by November. And so you might see some of those budgets shifting around a bit more at the beginning of the year. Okay, I don't know if there are any questions on the July report.
Trustee Kwan, was that a hand or? Yeah.
It was, but the Secretary Treasurer must be able to see into my mind because she answered my question before I even asked it.
Our Secretary Treasurer is very skilled. Any other questions? No? Back to the Secretary Treasurer.
Okay, so moving on to August. August 2023 reflects what was reported at Ops in the prior year. And the August report was run after month end. So for this month, it's still the preliminary budget plus any changes to month end. And in this case, some of the carry forward budgets have been included, but not the department carry forwards. So this is something that we've historically waited for the approval of our financial statements before they get added in. So you'll see a change in the budget numbers in September, I believe. So the actuals for this report reflect July 1st to August 31st, so 2 months of activity. The amount of revenue budgeted not yet received in August current year is at 89% compared to 86% last year. One other thing that you'll notice is the surplus from prior year line. It's like the last line in the revenue. We haven't yet adjusted the surplus. So that's that $1 million amount. Again, waiting for board approval on that next week before adjusting any of the budgets for that. On the expense side, the amount of expense budget available to spend current year, we're at 95% compared to 94% last year.
Thank you for that, Trustee Kwan.
Yeah, my question was actually just around the cafeteria revenue for August. I noticed that there is a little bit of revenue already year to date, and I just wondered about that because I wouldn't expect we'd have any kind of cafeteria activity happening in July or August. So.
Associate Secretary Treasurer.
Through the chair, I believe that is to do with prepaid cards. Some secondary schools have them and we back them at year end and then bring them into revenue in the summer. And then we only do that at year end. So yeah, we recognize the full amount.
Thank you for that. That makes perfect sense.
Thank you. Just a note from me, it's not a question, but from looking at the 2023-2024 numbers on page 63 to have budgeted $260 million and change, and to come up with $260 million and change to be like a rounding down to 0% is a testament to how good our financial team is at budgeting. So I commend you, the entire team, for sticking the landing. That's a very well done job. And with that, I once again get lost in my agenda. And then I move on to budget change reports. So once again, going to the Secretary Treasurer.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So the first budget change report that we will look at is for June 2024. Just a reminder that this report highlights all revenue and only the larger expense changes to the budget. So if we first look at the operating page, which is on page 72, and then looking specifically at the changes amended budget section, I'll highlight the new items that have been added since the May report. The first one is around interest revenue. And there was additional interest revenue that was earned to June 30th, 283,000. That's the first one. And then the second one is actually the next three. So the ones that start with May 2024 are related to our May enrollment count. So continuing education is up by about 9,000, distributed learning down by 29,000, and then pathways and partnerships up by 3. And just under that, there was a small grant, additional grant that we received for the ASAI, the After School Sport and Art Initiative program at James Bay. They weren't able to spend it. They weren't able to get the staffing, and so that funding was returned. And then because this is grant funding that's in the operating fund, what we do at year end is we do an entry to defer any revenue that is unspent. So you'll see that 3,000 roughly adjustment. The local education agreement, LEA, was a revenue adjusted to actual, so the actual nominal roll. So that declined by 68,000. There was some additional funding that came in for the Odyssey program. That's the language assistant. I believe that's French, up by 3,000. The task program through Pathways and Partnerships sold some sheds for 9,000. And then there was an adjustment made to match actual revenues and expenses with international education revenue, so all of their revenues. So revenue is up 261,000. Matching, it doesn't look like it's matching. There's 198,000 of expenses. The difference is the piece that the district pulls as a contribution. So that's what the difference is. And then lastly, the miscellaneous donations and revenues up by 48,000. And if moving on to the next pages, actually offer or special purpose, there's been no changes at all. The next 2 pages, the last page of the report goes to capital. And there is a very small increase, $90 of interest income increase in local capital, and a $43,000 increase in interest income in the ministry restricted capital. So that is June. I can just pause there if there are any questions regarding that before we move into the new fiscal year.
Any questions? Seeing none, back over to the Secretary Treasurer.
Thank you. This is the budget change report for August 2024, which actually is cumulative. So the reason why there wasn't a July is because the August report captures everything that's happened so far in this fiscal year. Because it's a new year, I'll just kind of start from the top and just identify the items that are in this report. So you will see the first line, it's 2024-2025 preliminary budget. So this is the budget that the board approved in April. The revenue and expense numbers that are there are what was approved. They don't match, and the reason they don't match is the number that's just below that, the surplus appropriation, 1.9 million is the difference. Just below that, changes surplus appropriation. This is pending board approval next week. The numbers that are under revenue are actually the numbers that are being reviewed by the board. The expenses just need to be updated to reflect the revenue, but you'll see once this is approved by the board, you see those changes reflected in the next September report. Where we'll focus is the changes to the amended budget section. First of all, you can see that deferred revenue that we just talked about in June coming in here, the 3,000. We've added in a budget for busing invoices to other school districts. So we've had school districts renting our buses for various field trips. There's an Island Health Community Wellness Grant that's come in. We had this grant last year. I believe it was in the May report, 12,000. $40 of miscellaneous donations and revenues. And then you'll see 2 credits that are there. And what we do for this is that when we build the annual budget, we budget for cafeteria revenue, for example, at $200,000. But instead of putting that into the accounts and making it seem like the schools already have $200,000, we pull it out. And then as they earn revenue throughout the year, we update the budget to reflect the actual revenue that they've earned. And we do the same thing for the theater revenue. So it's really just an internal process. We back it out and then we put it back in as it gets earned over the year. And the last 2 items are actually ministry grant revenue. The first one is related to educator exempt salary increases. It's labor settlement funding, 532,000. And then also the cost of living adjustments. So that's the 1% for all of our employee groups at 1.8 million. And we've also updated the contingencies and the fund balances to reflect proposed amounts for the end of June. What is reflected in our financial statements currently is that 1 million contingency. And then you can see the same local capital balances, 20,000, which is actually interest revenue that's sitting in local capital, and 3.2 million in ministry restricted capital. And if we go to the next page, special purpose. So far, we have 2 adjustments to our special purpose funds, both of them tied to the cost of living adjustment ministry funding. So 22,000 for Community Link and 232,000 for Classroom Enhancement Fund. And the capital fund interest revenue for both local capital and ministry restricted, $177 for local capital and just over 63,000 for ministry restricted capital. And that's it for that report.
Questions for the budget change report for August 2024? Seeing none, I thank the Secretary Treasurer for the information and the multiple reports this evening. We will move along to the operations report section of the agenda, and I turn it over to the Director of Facilities.
Hi, everybody. Quick update. I'll just kind of point out a couple of things. This summer, for some reason, we saw a lot of vandalism. We had 2 schools that had graffiti over the entire school. That means all the windows and doors were tagged. And 1 school was lucky enough to be tagged twice. We had some police and fire lockbox were actually removed from 1 school, caused us to rekey the entire school, both internally and externally. Operations department was busy cleaning all 52 schools, so that's all done. They also cleaned over 350 carpets, and cartage moved over 30 teachers. To give you an idea of that, that's over 3,000 boxes, and that doesn't include all their furniture as well. So that's a lot of moving for cartage in 1 summer. Is there any questions on the remainder of the report? I'll just keep it short.
Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, not a question, just a word of thank you. I really appreciated the addition of an inclusive projects section. I think that was really great to see. Our commitments and sort of what they translate into from a facilities perspective and all the work your team's doing. So thanks so much for that.
You're welcome.
Trustee Kwan.
Yeah, a couple of quick questions. So the monthly vandalism report that actually covers 2 months in this report over the summer. Okay, perfect. And then the other question I had was really around the sewer repair at Rock Heights, and just wondered if that was expected or if that came up because of some kind of mishap or.
No, it came up at the end of the year. We actually had 2 schools. Rock Heights was the worst. We had some interesting things put down the sewer system, so it backed up. So we had to dig down. It's unfortunate. It's a little over $10,000 repair, so it happens.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Trustee Painter.
Thanks, Chair. I was hoping for perhaps a little more information about the occupancy permit with Sundance, the learning studio there. It's been raised as an issue with some parents, and I'm just wondering if we have a sense of how much longer that's going to take.
No sense. We're still working with the City of Victoria. We don't even have the building permit yet. So what has to happen is we actually have to receive the building permit. And then from there, we've got our schedules already to send. We'll send in the schedules, and then we'll get the building inspector out and the fire department. So it's really, at this point, the City of Victoria is just working through this to try and get us expedited to get the kids in.
So it's really not, yeah, so it's not a question of any identified deficiencies. It's procedural.
Yeah, the last time we talked to the city, I believe it was yesterday, they had mentioned that, I don't even know, it's today, Monday. Anyways, well, last time we talked to the city, they mentioned that they didn't like some soffits, so we have to move some soffits just to plywood. We had to put some mulch on a tree. So it's just little things that are ongoing. So we're just working through the list of deficiencies between the architect and the city and us. So
Okay.
yeah, it's a process.
Trustee Kwan.
Sorry, one last little question. Since we're talking a little bit about occupancy, and earlier we talked about daycare specifically at Willows, but I actually just wondered if Rogers, the new before and after school care, I think it was before and after school care, if I remember correctly, is up and running and in that space and everything's going well.
Oh yeah, they had a summer program this summer. So they had a summer program. They're up and running for September. Lake Hill is up and running, and Hillcrest, we need a survey to be presented to Saanich before we can get occupancy. So it's so close. We're getting there.
Question from me. Spectrum was converted to a FOB site, so I'm assuming that's for building access as well as possibly classroom access, just for clarification.
Yeah, that's just for school site access. So the teachers and principal and that can get in and out based on hours of operation. So we know who's coming in and out of the building. So it's nice and secure for security.
Cool. Are we planning on doing that with other secondary schools or schools in the district?
Yeah, we're down to almost all of our schools now FOB sites. So we're getting down to the end of them. I don't ask me which ones are not FOB off the top of my head. I don't know, but majority of them are FOB now. So it's been a number of year process.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions about the operations report? Seeing none, back to the Director of Facilities for an update on Cedar Hill seismic replacement.
Yeah, this will be a bit longer. So the site's progressing. All the concrete slabs are now poured and the structural steel is erected. Steel studs inside the school are progressing. The site will be, they're aiming to be watertight by November. So all the doors and windows and the roofs will be installed, and then the trades can work over the summer months, or over the winter months when the rainy season happens. So we'll move quickly from there. The sidewalk along Gregory is dug up and will be poured soon, and this will be the new drop down for what will be the new parking lot. I'm sure if anybody has been around that area, there's been way too many road closures. So the District of Saanich is currently replacing the water main along Cedar Hill Road right in front of the school. Construction was initially supposed to be completed over the summer. However, they were delayed, and they did not begin this work until August 26th, right near the beginning of school. The District of Saanich has been kind enough to shorten the construction work hours between the hours of 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. from September 3rd onwards to allow just the teachers more efficient access to and from the schools. It is anticipated that the Cedar Hill Road between Garnet Road and Cedar Hill Crossroad will be either a single lane or alternating traffic or full closure until about September 18th, so near the end of the week. In addition to the District of Saanich water main work, a private developer is also installing utilities for a new townhouse development near the corner of Cedar Hill and Mortimer. And this work is actually the main reason for the current road closure. It's a private contractor that's having some technical issues, and unfortunately there's no timeline for that. Well, work is being completed on Cedar Hill Road. The vehicle access along Cedar Hill is only for staff only, so no student drop-off or pickup. There are drop-off and pickup locations for students along the field beside Garnet, and the St. Luke's Anglican Church has kindly opened their parking lot. The principal for the school site has been working with us and the general contractor in the District of Saanich just to decide where the students are going to be dropped off and picked up. Honestly, the principal is doing a fantastic job getting all the notices out to the school community. And the principal, along with the vice principal, and it's about 6 to 8 other additional staff members, along with Saanich's traffic control staff, are out there guiding the students just to make sure they get to and from point A to point B safely. And then to top all that off, we still have to do our offsite work for our multi-pathway, and that's tentatively scheduled around November to December. So there's lots of unknown timeframes at this time, but we'll get through them. Any questions?
Trustee Kwan.
Yeah, I was a little bit flabbergasted when I saw that road closure was happening on the first day of school, which was unfortunate. But I think, I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you to staff, and especially the principal and our district staff who've just worked tirelessly to make this happen and make sure that communication to parents has been timely and on point. So a huge thank you to everyone who did the heavy lifting to make sure that worked for our learning community, even with the non-existent communication with us about the road closures. So thank you.
Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, just thanks to Marnie and the team. I know how hard you are all working on these projects. I wanted to just have a quick review of the risk analysis in Appendix 2. And I feel like you've already explained this to me once, so I apologize. I've forgotten. The Saanich Municipal Unforeseen Expenses risk, and it says it's not been previously identified as a project risk. Can you remind me what that pertains to and why it wasn't identified as a project risk in the PDR?
Saanich works, so we had to cost, this is just from memory, so we had to cost the offsite work for Saanich. And then if it's over that cost, I think we worked with Saanich in order to get that budget back, but it's all approved and done within the project budget. So it's not a risk to the project because it's Sanage's project work that we're doing for Sanage within our budget, if that makes sense. And then on top of that, we've got the ministry risk reserve, which is about $4.6 million, give or take a little bit within our project.
Chair, may I just ask a follow-up?
You may.
Thank you. Thanks, Marnie, for refreshing my memory. So just to clarify my understanding, essentially, this is not something that the board's at risk of having to cover the costs of, first of all, from what I'm gathering so far. And second of all, to what extent do we think that this cost is going to eat into our reserve? Because as we all know from past experience, we know that those reserves go quickly and we're very likely to need them for the actual nuts and bolts of the school itself. So what's your assessment at this point of the extent to which those costs will eat into our risk reserve?
Well, the Sanage water main works is actually not our project. Sanage is doing it completely, so it's not a problem for us whatsoever. The Sanage connections that they have to do onto our school site is already costed in the project. We've already paid for that from Sanage. They kind of give us a bill up front, we pay for it, and then they do it when they're able to schedule it in. And then our project cost for the multi-use pathway is actually part of our project cost, and that was costed out through a cost controller. Those costs are part of our project costs. I mean, there could be something within the risk reserve that we might need to tag to, but at this point, we don't see any unforeseen that has to go towards that multi-use path.
Thanks, Marnie. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Trustee Kwan.
Yeah, and I think speaking kind of in the same vein as Trustee Duncan, with regards to the legal fees that on the budget report that's in the project, it looks like we're just slightly over with legal fees already. Just wanted to know kind of what the risks are there. I mean, obviously, whatever we're over, I think it's 16 and just about 16,500 right now. You know, we do have risk reserves to cover kind of those eventualities. However, how much do we think that that's going to go even further, or do we feel like we've exhausted legal fees at this point?
I think we'll have a little bit more legal fees, but the legal fees we're leaving it as can't speak tonight, as its own line item, and it will continue to be over. But what we're doing is there's a lot of non-conformance within the project, not a lot, but there's a few non-conformant items within the project, and we're working within the project cost, so on the construction cost GL, to actually get those costs recovered within the project. So we will eventually transfer it over and make it zero cost, but you won't probably see that till about January, February, March.
Thank you. Any final questions about the Cedar Hill project? Seeing none, I thank the Director of Facilities for her time this evening.
Thanks.
Moving through the agenda, we do not have public disclosure of in-camera items to discuss this evening, which brings us to new business. We have 2 points to discuss, the first of which is in relation to the Greater Victoria Foundation for Learning. I will turn it over to Trustee Kwan if you're willing to speak to the new business.
I am. What I'll do first is just read out the motion, and then I'll speak to it a bit and perhaps some changes that may need to be made that we've already kind of uncovered. So the recommended motion was that the Board of Education of Greater Victoria School District number 61 direct the superintendent to establish an advisory committee, which should include but not be limited to board and finance department member representation, to evaluate and provide recommendations to the board on improving the use of the Greater Victoria Foundation for Learning, and further that the advisory committee explore options for consulting with or hiring a grant writer, including defining the specific role, responsibilities, and time commitment, and include these recommendations in their report to the board. So the nature of the motion was we have a foundation. We have a Greater Victoria Foundation for Learning, which really hasn't been used. We've had $0 financials for a few years now. And so I thought, you know, it would be great if we could establish some kind of committee to kind of explore the use of that foundation. And then on top of that, we know that there's probably a myriad of opportunities for grants and different ways to actually bring money into our district. I think specifically for things that maybe we have to fund out of our block funding, but actually aren't included in block funding. For example, technology, we've heard some arts and that kind of thing as well. So, I think there's an opportunity there for us to explore and at least look at recommendations. Having said that, the Foundation for Learning is actually its own foundation. It has its own bylaws. It has its own board. So I'm not sure if the motion exactly is I guess, representative of who directs what. So I think at this point we might have to just amend it to something that might actually direct our chair to work with the foundation. I'm open to suggestions, but I think with the bylaws, it might need to be amended slightly.
Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you to Trustee Kwan. Yeah, I appreciate the impetus to moving this motion forward for discussion tonight. I cannot profess in any way to be experts on how our foundation is exactly established, other than to say, yes, it is its own foundation, but it is a foundation that is operated by the board. Both myself and the vice chair, along with the secretary treasurer and the superintendent, act in a leadership role around governance of the foundation. And so the best way to articulate this direction perhaps is not to just direct one member of our staff, but rather just to direct either me or myself and the vice chair to work with the other members of the foundation. I want to say, and again, Secretary Treasurer, help me if you wouldn't mind. Are we considered a board on the foundation, or are we considered directors? What is the proper terminology?
Secretary Treasurer.
It's actually both. So members of the board are called directors, but it is a board and it is completely separate from the school district. So it's a separate legal entity. It's a registered charity. So it's not I think it's tricky because we haven't actually really been doing activity, but the school district does not direct the foundation in any way. So I guess it's more, I can see why Trustee Kwan has some questions around superintendent and then making recommendations that I'll leave it at that, and because I've answered your question, and I think there's more to come. So I can jump in if there's anything else I can add to that.
That's fair. Sounds fair enough. So where I was going with that was to think of a more general way to accomplish what it is that Trustee Kwan is trying to accomplish, which is to really have our foundation look at options to really reinvigorate the foundation itself and look at options for fundraising, including grant writing. So I was thinking, do we want to have a motion where the Board of Education directs the chair and vice chair to work with the other members of the board of directors of the Greater Victoria Foundation for Learning to, again, rather than specific direction about establishing an advisory committee and going into details like that, maybe something more general. I know that we did have a motion that came forward in April of 2022. The motion at that point was that the Board of Education reinvigorate the Greater Victoria for Learning Foundation. So, we've contemplated how it is that we as a board will be utilizing the foundation moving forward. And we certainly have contemplated using it for fundraising purposes. It doesn't exist completely and entirely separate from the board, right? So I was going to suggest something like explore options for utilizing the foundation for fundraising. But again, open to colleagues and also looking to staff to see if that kind of wording would address any concerns that you have. But I guess what I would say, regardless of where we settle on this tonight, I can't foresee us not being able as a board to give direction, however high level. The foundation is ours. Even if it operates separately to the school district, we created it as a board or as a previous board. So yeah, so I don't know if that's very helpful or not, but certainly that was kind of where I landed as I thought through this.
Secretary Treasurer.
My wondering is, given that the foundation does have its own board, if it might make sense for, like, if we have the capacity within the school district to create an advisory council and make recommendations, perhaps the motion would be to make those recommendations to the board of the foundation. And then action can be taken by the board of the foundation. Alternatively, the board of the foundation also has the ability to create an advisory council to do that work. But again, I don't know who that advisory council would be, because there are just 4 directors and no members, no budget. So I could see the connection with the school district in that any movement forward with the foundation would require financial input from the school district. But those are 2 options that we might want to consider.
Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, the Secretary Treasurer. At least from my perspective, I think the first option sounds like a sensible one, in that it would allow us to provide some direction tonight within our own wheelhouse, and then take that as far as we want, and then eventually present it to the board of directors, which again includes myself, the vice chair, the superintendent, and the secretary treasurer. So it's by no means completely sort of devoid of our input, our ability to provide input. But yeah, that first suggestion sounds procedurally a little cleaner. But again, looking to my colleagues for their views.
It sounds good by me. That's my views, and Trustee Kwan tends to agree. Trustee Painter, is that an agree, or you'd like to speak?
Well, no, I think it makes sense. I think the biggest thing is that I think it would be useful for us here, the SD61 board, and perhaps with our partners as well, the more the merrier, and staff, to just have a conversation about what opportunities the foundation represents. We're recognizing potential reductions in international student funding as a result of changing district demographics. We're pressed for non-inflationary cost increases. We need to look at other potential revenue streams. And one of the things that I like about the foundation is that by centralizing grant writing resources, we could potentially alleviate some of that from hardworking teachers who shouldn't have to be doing their own fundraising, and also ensuring that an equity lens can be placed upon who actually receives the resources. There's a mechanism for us to try to start to address some of the have and have not issues that we see across the district. But I think the first thing is just having a conversation, understanding what the foundation is and what the potential options are out there. So, I'll raise my hand to whatever gets that ball rolling, but the first step is just having a chat.
Nissa.
Thank you. And through the chair, my concern, and I am generally like, I think exploring this is a great idea. One concern that I have is given the continued pressure on the budget in the district to meet basic needs and things that should be part of our public school experience and to support students. I have concerns over looking for funds through grants, which in the jargon you could refer to as soft money as opposed to hard money, like things that are term dependent. I'm particularly, something that's brought to mind is the outpouring of public support to support the music programs in schools that we saw a couple of years ago. But then there's an ongoing cost to that, and if it's, you know, if we have to continually go back to the community with asks to support things that potentially should be or could be core things that we should be advocating to the ministry to fund to support public education, I think particularly around technology, particularly around security of our digital devices in schools. I would just, that would be my one concern, is that I see this as a great opportunity, but it should be addressing things that I think are not core to ensuring that public education is funded in a way that supports the entire community and meets the needs, the learning needs in the schools. I mean, I have every faith in our community would come together to support our schools and our learning community. But I think that pressure needs to be applied on the provincial government to improve funding to public schools.
Thank you. I think this type of effort where suddenly a school district in the province of British Columbia is becoming a quote unquote charity case should be a bit of a wake-up call and a poke in the ribs to the ministry, saying you're clearly not funding education enough in this province, that this is a step that your school districts are now looking at taking, where we have to go begging to the community to say, in order for us to really effectively educate our students, we need to be asking for extra money because the province isn't cutting it. To me, that yes, it should be a short-term solution. It should not be something that we have to rely on, because it should be the case that the province adequately funds us. And Durand, Secretary Treasurer Stride.
Thank you, Chair. I know there are a couple of examples of foundations that have been successful in moving forward in support of their district's needs. I just want to add a word of caution, and I know this will be discussed if this motion moves forward. Previous conversations that we've had around this have kind of stalled and haven't moved forward because of the foundation not being established and not having the ability to fund positions. And so my biggest concern would be that we have great support for this foundation, and then the work is falling on myself and the financial services team. And I just don't think there's capacity there to champion something like this without additional financial support from the board.
Trustee Kwan.
Yeah, I 100% agree with the Secretary Treasurer. I think that's the reason why, you know, you don't just want to go into this willy-nilly. And I think, you know, an advisory committee exploring these options, what would it take to be able to do this grant writing or, you know, sustain additional FTE in order to explore some of these possibilities. This is why we want to do this work ahead of time and really think about all of and have all of this input as to you know, what's it going to take and make those recommendations. You know, for example, I know grant writers out there or consultants, and they just take a percentage of the grant that you're receiving instead of you paying them ahead of time. So there are options like that, but you know, I think it's really important for us to kind of, you know, come together and have an advisory committee that can kind of explore some of these options and look at some some ways that it might be possible to do things. So yeah.
I suppose at this time, once again, do we want to amend a motion? Do we want to go with the recommended motion? How do we want to proceed? Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So I'm wondering if we want to just sort of simplify things to leave things a little bit more open for that discussion that Trustee Painter mentioned to unfold. And to allow our partners to feed in. So perhaps something more general, like the usual preamble, but directing the superintendent to establish an advisory committee. Well, we could include membership in that or not. But I, including but not limited to board, finance department members, representation, and partners to evaluate how the Greater Victoria Foundation can be utilized moving forward, and provide recommendations to the Board of Education. Something like that. So we keep it kind of in-house. We don't kind of involve the foundation itself or have to worry about foundation bylaws or what the foundation can or cannot do, what we can and cannot direct it to do. And we just sort of leave it, open it up to that internal conversation with an action, which is to provide the board with some recommendations. Did you want me to put something in the chat, Chair?
That would be appreciated, I think, for myself, my fellow members, as well as the Secretary Treasurer.
Yeah, no problem. Let me just do that quickly now. So the ... is just the usual preamble. So that the Board of Education of School District number 61 Greater Victoria direct the superintendent to establish an advisory committee, including but not limited to board, finance department members, representation, and education partners to evaluate how the Greater Victoria Foundation can be utilized moving forward. Oh, and I'm sorry, and further, and further, provide the board with recommendations. Provide recommendations to the board.
Sounds good to me. Looking to the Secretary Treasurer for a thumbs up to see you got it. Thumbs up. Looking for a mover. Trustee Kwan moves. Discussion of the recommended motion. Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion as moved.
Aye.
That passes unanimously. We move along to H2 of new business, which is District of Saanich Crossing Guard funding. So I turn it over to Trustee Painter to speak to this.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just read it out and then carry on from there. The Board of Education of Greater Victoria, School District number 61, direct the chair to write to District of Saanich Mayor and Council, express our concern regarding the formula employed to calculate crossing guard requirements, further advising them of the precise date when funding currently provided for crossing guards will end, and finally implore them to address this shortfall on behalf of student safety. And I will seek clarity as I go through, but it is my understanding that Saanich is the only municipal partner that is not providing full funding for identified crossing guard needs, and that we are forecasting an end to that financial support partway through the school year. What my desire here is, understanding that we have already raised this matter is to provide a comprehensive explanation of all the elements. What our rationale is for identifying crossing sites, because I understand this varies from Saanich, and what the costs are, and the actual date when crossing guard services will no longer be provided. And I understand that a contingency fund has been set aside within the district for the purposes of carrying this on. However, that simply rewards Saanich for bad behavior and is inequitable in comparison to the conscious efforts that all the other municipalities have actually done to properly fund this. So I don't believe that's an option moving forward. And the other side is that we've had numerous and lengthy discussions about whose responsibility is to provide traffic safety to and from schools. Motor Vehicle Act and other legislation clearly points to the municipalities having this responsibility. It's not something the district should be taking on, particularly at a time when we are forecasting deficits, when we are cutting services that we should be focused on. I want to make sure that I feel the board has done due diligence to fully inform mayor and council of the implications of their decision not to provide adequate funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Trustee Painter, for raising this. I just wanted to share a bit of context to help us ground our conversation around this motion, if I may, Chair. Thank you. So in the chat, I put a link to the last advocacy letter that I sent on behalf of the board at the board's direction on the 1st of May of this year. And it outlines our estimated costs, the shortfall, the number of intersections that need to be funded, the kind of cooperative arrangements that we were proposing. And I'm not aware of whether we ever received a response. I'm just wondering if the Secretary Treasurer perhaps could just update us on whether we did receive a response to that 1st of May advocacy letter available via the link in the chat, and further, if there's any updates that could help us in our discussion of the motion around the crossing guard contribution agreement talks and progress in that respect.
Secretary Treasurer Strand.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not aware of a response that has come back from that letter. I'll double check just in case I missed something during the summer, but I feel like I would remember that one if I saw it. I know I did get a follow-up in March, which was before the letter went out from my contact at the District of Saanich. They want to move forward with the agreement with them. They're actually looking at a contribution agreement, I believe it's called, and not a memorandum of understanding. The problem is that the language within that agreement supports them not fully funding. And so I'm not sure without a response from the letter how we would move forward with that agreement. I don't think it would be supported if the language is changed to support, first of all of the intersections that we provide crossing guards at. Some of them they don't deem eligible at all and provide zero funding. And of the ones that they do determine as eligible for funding, they fund at 50%. So nothing has moved forward on that at this point.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. Just for the benefit of the people who are watching this online or watching it later, so the estimated cost for the 2024-2025 school year was $161,644. at 17 intersections in the district of Saanich. That is the number we are speaking about. Trustee Duncan, do you have a follow-up? Yes.
Yeah, if I may, again, just to provide some context, and further in the letter, I believe we were acknowledged that, they were only willing to provide sort of half that, the funding that would be required. And so, I guess what I'm proposing is that in the context of, we don't believe having received a response, us already covering the shortfall or being in a position to cover the shortfall, I believe as of halfway through the financial year. If I'm correct, but the Secretary Treasurer can correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, go ahead, Secretary Treasurer, if that's okay with you, Chair. I will cede the floor.
We did do a quick calculation. First of all, when we did the budget process, the reduction that was made related to the unfunded portion was just under 128,000. That was updated when we did our year-end financials to build a contingency at current wage rates, has increased to just under 133,000. Doing a quick calculation, financial services. So basically when we budget for 50% for the full year, but if we take their full funding partway through the day on November 1st, we would run out of the funding that they have provided to us.
That's coming up soon. Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Secretary Treasurer, for clarifying that. Yeah, so in light of all that, one of the things we could do, is to sort of send a follow-up letter, articulating some of the things that, or all of the things that Trustee Painter proposes in the motion. And perhaps, indicating our board's concern about entering into a contribution agreement, which would not have the District of Saanich fully funding all the crossing guards that we feel are required. I think part of the complexity here is that their own rules of engagement, so to speak, so their own assessment of the crossings in question kind of result in less funding. So they don't believe that we need crossing guards at all the intersections that we feel we need crossing guards at. So there are some additional complexities in addition to the funding that perhaps if we are going to send a follow-up letter, we should address specifically. But again, I just wanted to provide a bit of context and background.
Thank you, Trustee Duncan. Trustee Painter.
Well, and this is one of the challenges of our involvement in this. We are able to engage staff and do aspects of the administration to provide this, but ultimately it should be a flow through from the municipality through us to the service. And honestly, to the extent that Saanich has made decisions about where crossing guards are required, I personally feel we should be following their direction. This is 100% their responsibility to address, and we should be following suit with what they're doing. We provide funding, and only at certain locations, then it comes back to the residents of Saanich to decide whether or not they want to encourage their municipality to do otherwise. And by the same token, if they are only providing 50% funding for those locations, then we have a clear point in time when there is no service provided going forward. And I realize that sounds harsh, but we're already not meeting our direct responsibilities. We're not in a position to take on the responsibilities of other levels of government. And it's just my motivation here was to try to address this before we get to that critical point. so that all parties recognize their responsibilities and take the responsible actions. Thank you.
Secretary Treasurer.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add in, Trustee Painter references the formula. There is, it's policy that District of Saanich policy around their school crossing guards, and then it references a hazard rating. And so then they have like a minimum number of points that are required in order to meet funding eligibility. And so I do have some additional information that I've gathered on kind of what things are considered in getting points towards an intersection. So I'm happy to share that too as we move forward.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. Looking for guidance on how we want to proceed. Do we want to go with recommended motion, adapted motion, no motion? I serve at the pleasure of my fellow trustees. Trustee Painter.
If only to advance the conversation, I'll move the initial motion and am open to any amendments as suggested.
Discussion of the motion in question. Trustee Kwan.
I think that's actually, I think it even stems from our discussion earlier, it's again where, there's things that aren't core that we're paying for because we're just not getting that money from elsewhere when it really should be. It's not, safety of roads is not the responsibility of a school district, but we want our kids to be safe. So we're putting that money in there. But I'm 100% for further advocacy. So I'd be in favor of this for sure.
Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm certainly in favor of chasing up a response and indicating the precise impact of the funding shortfall when exactly we will run out of funding. I would prefer to have some direction from the board regarding the formula that the policy analysis and decisions that the municipality is making about which intersections require crossing guards, though, because I believe, and again, the Secretary Treasurer might know this off the top of their head, but I believe that if we were to remove those intersections that the municipality doesn't believe require funding, we would end up with a much reduced gap in funding. So, yeah, I'd rather have clarity of direction. Like, are you directing me to write a letter to say, okay, we are not going to provide services at the intersections you're telling us, Municipality of Saanich, don't require crossing guards? In which case the shortfall that I would be making them aware of would be significantly reduced. So some clarity around that I think is needed, and perhaps, I don't know if we're in a position to give that direction to me tonight without understanding more about the policies, or maybe we are, I don't know, but I certainly would appreciate that clarity so that I know what it is you want me to do.
I think, Trustee Duncan, one of the benefits of moving it tonight is that we are ops and the board is next week. So in theory, we would just be progressing this on to the board level before, which would allow for a little bit of time to do that discovery, to figure out how exactly we want to do things, as well as creating an opportunity next week at board meeting to discuss the details at a more fulsome level.
Indeed. Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. Yeah, good point.
Trustee Painter.
Well, if I could just add that the District of Saanich is one side of the discussion. We've obviously come up with our own approach for why crossing guards are needed at additional locations, and that's something that I would recommend as being the counterpoint, that we'll need both elements to properly understand and develop a coherent case for moving forward.
Makes sense to me. We've been doing crossing guards at those intersections for a reason, so saying what exactly that reason was would stand to benefit our cause. Further discussion of the motion as presented.
Chair, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Let me put my virtual hand up. Pardon me, Chair.
All good. Trustee
Thank
Duncan.
I'm a little slow at this time of evening, so thanks for bearing with me. Perhaps do we want to, in the motion, just give some direction if we do need additional information by the board meeting? Not that that will necessarily matter because the board still hasn't voted on it, but perhaps that we could just sort of confirm with the secretary treasurer so that they know what it is that we'd be looking for at the board meeting in the way of information, even if we don't give direction by a motion.
Secretary treasurer or superintendent, whoever put up their hand over there.
Thank you. If I may, through the chair, I think one of the concerns we will have is timing and being able to, based on the board pack-up that we already have to create, having the time and opportunity to get to the schools to find out the exact, some of which is historical and some of which is evolving needs for crossing guards by Monday.
Trustee Duncan.
Okay, so in light of that kind of operational reality, perhaps we want to refer this motion to the October operations policy and planning standing committee for discussion, with the caveat that we would at that point want this additional information. Or, you know, again, I could send a chaser letter, right? That doesn't go into more detail, but my personal, you know, view is that it would be better to be really clear in one other letter rather than sending multiple letters if we're not really ready to include everything we might want to. But again, you know, I'm happy to, that's just my suggestion.
My concern with that, speaking as myself, is that we would be very close to the November 1st funding cutoff. Secretary Treasurer.
I think we're aware of the funding cutoff, and that's one thing. I'm curious about the stopping the provision of service from a risk perspective, a liability perspective, given that we've clearly recognized that there's safety issues at those intersections and have funded them ourselves. Secondly, if we're moving forward with the decision to stop service provision, we also need to have some time to consider the impact on the staff. These are our staff members, our EAs with additional hours, who will have those hours reduced. So I'm not sure around notice and things like that, that would need to be discussed with HR as well.
Taking my chair hat off for just a second, I'm not particularly interested in that service being ended. That's not an avenue I would be willing to go down, but I opened it up to, we'll go to Nissa first and then we'll go to Trustee Painter.
And thank you, Chair. And I'm not sure if this is the appropriate juncture, but is this something where it would be helpful to get parents in the affected locations to give voice about the concerns about road safety. I know particularly in Saanich, we've had a couple of mortalities in the recent years around school locations and road safety. So is this a place where we can bring it back to VCPAC and the PACs? Okay.
Yeah, without speaking for everyone on the board, yes.
Wanted to be sure about an appropriate use of advocacy here.
Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just speaking to Mrs. comment, I think, you know, clarity of purpose, like ensuring that we are clear on what it is that we're trying to advocate for. Clearly, overall, we're all going to agree that we're advocating for students to be safe when they leave our buildings, right, to go on their journeys home. On the other hand, I think there's there's an issue here around mandates and funding another public body's area of responsibility. And you know, what I'm hearing is that we've continued to do so because we are concerned that these other intersections are not safe enough to have kids crossing without a crossing guard. But that being said, you know, I wouldn't want advocacy to start without us as like a district being clear what we're trying to achieve. So I kind of go back to my initial kind of comment around like, perhaps we want to, I know it's not ideal timing, but perhaps we want to just take the time to collect all the information, be clear on the facts, and then have a clear way forward, even though it would be a short runway before November and we run out of funding.
Nissa, back to you.
Thank you. And through the chair, that's sort of the, like, I want to know the appropriate timing and how we can be effective as a parent voice. Because it sounds like from the discussion, we don't want to potentially weigh in or chime in a way that makes the situation less clear or doesn't move things in the direction that we need to go in.
Okay, with that discussion possibly completed, we still have a motion on the floor. So Trustee Painter, because it is your motion, I will, or is it Trustee Kwan's motion? I don't even remember anymore. It's Trustee Painter's motion.
I would move to refer this to October ops with the understanding that additional information about those crossing sites will be provided at that time. And who knows, that much closer to a potential endpoint might be the level of motivation that other decision makers need to get off the pot. So.
Okay. So withdrawing the motion and then moving to refer to October ops.
I don't believe we need to withdraw, simply refer it.
Cool. All those in favor of referring to October ops?
Aye.
And that carries unanimously. Moving into notice of motion, we do not have notice of motion for next month. General announcements. Looking to my colleagues, seeing none, which brings us to adjournment. May I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Trustee Kwan. All those in favor?
Aye.
And that carries unanimously. Thank you, everybody. Have yourselves a pleasant evening.